All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. This is the second of the 8 panels that we have in the STARS track. This one is focusing on SaaS ecosystem, so thank you so much for being here. I'll quickly introduce the panelists here. I think many of you will probably know the panelists already. So to my right, to your left, we've got the CEO of Ellucian, Laura Ipsen. Next to her is Jessie Woolley-Wilson, who's the chair, president, and CEO of DreamBox Learning. And then next to her is Greg Sebasky, the CEO of Ascend Learning. We were supposed to have Hardeep Gulati, who's the CEO of Powerschool here. He was stuck on a Southwest flight, won't be able to make it, unfortunately. Yeah, I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about even without Hardeep. So, yeah, there's plenty of room up here as well. Yep.
Yoga poses.
So maybe starting here, if you look at my coverage list, I love vertical SaaS, vertical software companies. I think there's a lot to like there. And I guess as you think about your solutions, you're each playing in a different part of the educational ecosystem. Why does vertical expertise matter in your subsector? What does it allow your company to do that others couldn't if they weren't as specialized to handle the complexity of your subsector? And anyone can start. I don't know if anyone wants to, or I'll just pass to maybe Greg at the end.
Want me to start?
Sure.
Okay, yeah, so it's interesting you use the word horizontal and vertical. So vertical from the standpoint of, I guess, Ellucian's participation in the higher ed sector,
Yep.
You would consider vertical. When I took over this job at Ascend, we looked at maybe these kinds of businesses that create capacity across multiple venues of education as being more of a horizontal platform, and I had considered whether or not Ascend Learning would want to be a horizontal platform, but when I was thinking about horizontal, I was thinking about covering all subject areas, not necessarily higher ed specifically. So we talk about Ascend, we'll come back to this later, as a vertical business within the education marketplace, but not as a horizontal software company, but as a vertical company that really tries to tune all of its solutions towards the field of study that the students are interested in, as opposed to trying to provide a platform that can support every learner, but really to get deep into the content and the success models for the students that want to pursue individual careers. So when you hear me talk about vertical, that's what I mean by vertical.
Got it.
So two thoughts come to mind when I hear that question. The first is, in the K-12 space, the purchasing rhythm, purchasing motion is so specialized, and it's different at the C-suite than it is at the kind of balkanized building level. And I think it's sometimes very difficult to get folks from other, say, enterprise technology companies to come in and be successful and go to market in K-12 because it's wonky. How you do it, when you do it, the concentration of revenue in certain quarters, it's very, very specialized. So I think from a vertical standpoint, it's good to get that sector knowledge. The other thought that came to me was just around solution sets. And so there are solution sets in K-12 that impact learning outside of where learning happens. And then there's a different set of solutions that impact learning at the point of instruction. And so vertically, so like at DreamBox, when we're actually in the classroom delivering personalized learning, to be able to help people understand your value proposition, you have to understand what happens in the classroom. Whereas if you're kind of outside of that, it's still very important, maybe an LMS company, for example, it's a different kind of expertise even though it's still in K-12. So there's verticals within the verticals.
Well, as I look at it, for Ellucian, we've been in higher education for 56 years, very driven to understanding the intricacies and the complexities of higher education. And I think it's hard if you really want to meet the customer goals and build something for scale and longevity and continue to modernize. It's harder when you're not a vertical. From the buying centers to the strategic plan of an institution, really understanding the goals and motivations are critical. At the same time, as we built out our Ellucian SaaS platform, we can in some ways go more horizontal to enable the capabilities that could be horizontal players too. So in essence, we ultimately become both.
Got it. And as you think about the tech stacks at some of your customers, it seems like there's a lot of fragmentation, a lot of different, and I think it's probably true on the content side. I think it's definitely true on the software side. how fragmented do they look? And do you expect a trend towards consolidation over time?
Well, we're seeing consolidation now. It's very fragmented. It's not just the buying centers, but I think if you take an ERP or student information system over decades, what did we all do? It was customize everything, make it work exactly the way that we want to, and now we're actually unraveling that to be able to scale, to move to SaaS and get, just get economies of scale. Whether you're a multi-campus institution or you're an entire system, getting that scale is critical. Why? Because right now the most important thing to most institutions when it comes to technology is accessing the data, understanding the data, how to power up the data, how to move it in ways for greater student and institutional success. It's really hard when you're fragmented from reaching that. And while yes, everything needs to be integrated, it still takes a lot. Those integrations are very fragile. There's cyber issues related to that. So we see a consolidation. Part of it's financial, part of it's post-COVID. Part of it is, hey, we got to build the solutions of the future, and we've got to do it faster. I'll give you an example. All of the colleges in North Carolina run on Ellucian. They will move to cloud, and when the interim president right now asked, how many veterans do we have across the colleges? He's like, Laura, I have no idea. I have to poll every single one. I want to know how many veterans are there. I want to be able to shape programs for veterans, but I have to go to every single college to find that out. So I think when you think about the need for consolidation, it can't be because of just a financial reason. It really has to be able to build more value and solutions to meet the needs of the colleges and the students.
Yeah, what comes to mind with that question for me is there's kind of a heads and a tails. The heads is it's so reasonable to want efficiencies, ease of use, and economies of scale if you're on similar platforms. That makes sense. So the teacher who's using multiple ed tech technologies would like to understand a kind of holistic view of the student's performance and needs and customize her live instruction based on that instead of having to go to 5 different separate buckets. Reasonable. Heads. The tails of it is if the systems, the 5 systems that she's using are using data differently, then you could get false comparisons or comparisons that don't make sense. So in the case of DreamBox, we built our content at the sub-objective level so that if a child is struggling in fraction, is it because of proportionality, decimal, like whatever that is, and we can actually customize the pedagogy and put that child right where they need to be. But if you're part of an ecosystem of data and the data is filled in, how do you compare that data that's collected at the sub-objective level with maybe another solution that's collected at a higher level? We had to do that in order to power the adaptive platform, but what is that teacher to do? How does that teacher interpret the data across systems that were built differently with different philosophies, let alone modalities? So I think there's a heads and a tails, and I'll remind everybody in this audience about, in Bloom, we had real high hopes for what would happen with middleware, and it just didn't work.
Yeah, so for us, again, back to how we participate only in higher ed, and we're very specialized in various healthcare careers, so nursing's probably the biggest one. But the variation, at least that we need to interface with, is not as great as it used to be, right? There's not as many large LMS companies, right, competing in the space any longer in higher ed, and there's a set of standards, right, that you guys, most of you are aware of, called Learning Tools Interoperability. Most people are using the 1.3 version today. We're actually moving towards LTI Advantage for most of the modules that we supply that are specialized, whether it's assessments for nursing that can certainly feed the LMS with the data that needs to be provided and provide all the ease of single sign-on and so forth for the students. So they think they're still in the LMS environment, but they're actually utilizing our tools. That's pretty straightforward in the way we've designed our platform in a microservices strategy so that schools can buy individual components of our solution and we can link to them through LTI. And even with corporate partners, with individual LMS systems, we also try to provide the linking with LTI, and what LTI Advantage gives you, which is fairly new, allows it to give you deep linking to all the content that you're trying to reach. So we think that this was a right strategy for us because we can address different subsectors in the higher education market and serve up the tools that the students and the faculty need, but having this, what I would call it, fairly elegant integration with the LMS systems at the schools.
Got it. That's very helpful. And I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit. I think you're one of the only Stars Track panelists that's really scaled in the healthcare space. So I think it'd be a missed opportunity if I didn't dig into that a little bit. You know, what do you see as the biggest obstacles as you think about getting more throughput of healthcare professionals, nurses, physicians, allied health, et cetera? And I guess along those lines, is there more that can be done with simulations, AR, VR? How are you thinking about it?
Yeah, so the last, few years, as you guys all read in the paper, have been really difficult. So 100,000, nurses left the profession just between 20 and 21. That attrition somehow continued. Some nurses have become gig workers or working through temp agencies and traveling. So I know even the Boston market where I live, the cost of nursing to the hospital system was up 5x from 2020 to 2022. $1.3 billion penalty to all the healthcare system in the Boston metro area, and put all those hospitals into a loss position. So the urgency to get people into these professions is really, really high. We weren't graduating enough people already prior to the pandemic. And with the nursing profession kind of losing its maybe luster with some students who don't want to work in these stressful, difficult environments, it's been hard. Now that said, there's still 80,000 students that are academically prepared to enter a nursing program. And we think to succeed because we actually administer half the nursing admissions tests in the United States, so we kind of know who's prepared and who's not. The problem is there's not enough slots in the nursing schools for two reasons. One is the states control the capacity, and the second is there's not a realization yet through these tools we can provide that the faculties could handle larger cohorts. So I think the introduction of some of the simulation tools that we provide, as well as the personalized learning that we provide through our assessments, should allow the faculty to handle larger cohorts, but we always have to convince the regulator state by state that that's the right thing to do. And we spent a lot of time during the pandemic, for example, in California, here where we are today, trying to get the regulators to allow 50% of the clinical time to be done through simulation. California had capped it at 25. Other states were already doing it at 50. Now, I don't know if you want to go beyond that, but we think simulation's a good solution because clinical time is expensive. It's hard to find in these stressed hospital environments. The other thing it does, it allows the students to maybe deal with a larger variety of situations and with patients than they might see in their normal practice. So you can imagine if your rotations in a community health center versus a trauma center, you're going to be seeing different kinds of patients, right? So in a simulation environment, you can test people across all those various situations, and it's really a valuable approach. But first thing we need to do, and we're working on this with lobbying efforts in DC as well as at the state level, to try to get 80,000 more slots open, which would increase the nurses entering the market from like 225,000 a year coming into a program up to 300,000, and then try to sustain that through the end of the decade. But a lot of hard work ahead.
I am not an expert in this field, but I have two nieces studying nursing. I also think the challenge is the socioeconomic issues of getting healthcare providers in the right areas. And what you see is that the healthcare workers and costs are going up, that we also have issues of equity with healthcare in areas where nurses and doctors don't want to live and work. So there also have to be programs that help the funding of this into regions across the country, rural areas, because it's hard to get the capacity there as well. So kudos to you for working on the policy issues, because they're tough.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for bringing it up. But Senator Sanders' Health Committee is very much involved in this. We're just finishing a pilot for academic preparation. Even though there's 80,000 students we think can study and get through the program and persist, there's this other bucket of people that would like to come, but they're not academically prepared coming out of high school. So Rasmussen, I think, is one school that's doing this on their own. We're going to bring a product to market, I think, that's going to provide kind of a 6-week remediation module coming out of high school to try to catch people up from these challenged high schools, primarily in urban areas. The question is who pays, right? So that's what we're working on.
This conversation is so stunning to me because there's so many similarities with education. Like I could change your vernacular and just put in a different word, it's the same problem.
So maybe, shifting back a little bit to your companies, as you think about the benefits of scale, what do you see as the biggest benefits as you continue to scale? And why do you think it's been so hard, when you think about ed tech companies in particular, why has it been so hard for so many ed tech companies to scale?
Well, a couple things. My goal of scaling our company is to be a broader infrastructure of systems or systems of systems and cohorts. Most states have formal systems, so if you can create a system-wide model based on software as a service, I can scale faster, I can unravel some of the complexities, lower costs, increase value, heighten the opportunities that we have to protect institutions on a cyber level. We have a great partner, AWS, to do that. But at the same time, I have 150 partners in my ecosystem. We're all about building the ecosystem. I'm not going to provide all the innovation, so scale for me is the power of an ecosystem of partners and all the ed tech companies looking to scale. You can't do that one by one. It's too hard. When you actually create a system, and I'm in 30 systems across the country, and move them to SaaS, then you get economies of scale. You get the smaller institutions can have, the best technology support. You have shared CISOs at some level, and then you open up opportunity for more innovation because there's so many amazing ed tech companies looking to scale, and that's one of the things, our goal. I'm not going to provide all the innovation. I'm looking for the partner ecosystem to deliver the value to the institutions, to be able to onboard quickly, and we're here to talk about SaaS, and you can only really do that with SaaS.
And maybe it would have been nice to have Hardeep here to talk about this too, but you did announce an expanded partnership with Powerschool pretty recently. I think you kind of framed it as K through 20. Maybe can you talk about that partnership?
I'll channel him quickly. And this actually happened because we were on a panel together at ASU+GSV, and I was like, why aren't we working with K through 12? Because higher education sits at the center, this great nexus, looking back to say, what's going to help students be more successful based on how students arrive to college and universities? How do we look at the data holistically, K through 20? How do we build an economic model? We're partnering to make sure, and also with the Burning Glass Institute, that we can see all the student data, see the whole journey in the right ways with the data, make sure that you're giving support and capabilities along the way, and creating an economic model so a governor can say, I actually see real time how my students are doing at every level. I can assess and evaluate and the programs I put in, the dollars we invest. Our thesis is, it's more important and powerful to put dollars in education. If you do that, you're going to have fewer dollars for incarceration. So this is what we have to figure out. The challenging part is we've all lived in these silos. I'm in higher ed, I'm in K through 12, I'm in workforce. All of this is coming together, and that's really the power of SaaS, right? It's not the where we're going, it's the jumping point from all of the innovation and capabilities and seamless student journey and well-being that we can do much better job on in the future. So I hope that's what Hardeep would say too.
But yeah, I was going to say, Laura, but given your dominance in the marketplace, it's great that you have the ecosystem strategy. I mean,
my general counsel hates this.
Salesforce was there for a long time, then they started buying, right, the partners. But they still have many, many people.
We want to enable partners.
Do you establish then the data standards that they have to follow, so at least the data is coming to you in the way you can represent it in dashboards?
Well, we certainly have data models, and part of that we've worked with the Gates Foundation. So I think that has to be something in common, and data governance is more important. The model should really represent what the value is to the institutions and how they need to access the data. So looking at those common data models is working with an ecosystem of partners to establish that. We are not proprietary. We're open, interoperable, and extensible. That's the way that we solve the most critical issues that we see in all of education today.
I'd say that from a K-12 perspective, just thinking about the last 20 years, there are three influences. One is capital, another is fragmentation, and so on the capital side, there was a long time we couldn't get capital to come into K-12. You can't scale if you can't hire a direct sales force and you're relying on, resellers, for example. Every bit of money was going to my colleagues in higher ed, and it didn't matter how great the solution was because all the innovation was happening in higher ed. So we couldn't attract capital, and we couldn't attract growth capital in particular to scale. The second thing is one of the reasons why the capital didn't want to come in because of the distribution. And so the distribution is so hard to master that it's very, very hard to see a lot of outcomes that would attract that capital to invest early. And then the fragmentation gets around the customer experience. So one of the great things about SaaS is if you can just get that customer and keep that customer, then you can go from an acquisition, very expensive, to a wallet share strategy for growth. You got to keep that customer. But there's so many different strategies and so many different rubrics and so many different deciders and so many different influencers. We like to say in K-12, the C-suite buys the solution and the teachers renew it. Okay, so where do you send your marketing dollar? On the C-suite or on the teacher? Where do you put your fixed costs? Directed at the teacher. So those three influences have really made it harder to scale. The good news is that more smart capital is coming in, largely, I think, because of conferences like this. And they see innovation that might have been birthed in K-12 but has relevance in K-20. And so we're starting to see a scaling, and we're able to kind of attract a different talents. The last thing I'll say, I've been in this business for a long time, and I almost left it because it was really hard to get people who wanted to come, the best talent, with the best hearts to come into this space. It was very, very difficult. You tried to upgrade teachers who got tired in the classroom to come into your company. Now, we compete against top enterprise technology companies to have engineers come to DreamBox or to have sales or marketing come to DreamBox. So now we're kind of a blend of it, and I think that's going to spur scaling.
Really interesting. Great.
Yeah, I'm going to address the scale question a little differently. Say for us, scale gives the opportunity to actually be talking to the most customers, most students, and have the most data over time to provide a better personalization and better success rates. So if you think about for our nursing business, it's been around for now, I guess, almost 20 years, I guess. So with fairly high market share, I'm not going to specify, but it's pretty high. But
You're saying you're dominant?
I don't use that word anywhere.
Yeah, be careful.
Yeah, yeah, so you think about it, you've got the entrance exam information for, millions and millions of students who were entering nursing programs, and then you'll be able to track how they progressed, who persisted, who didn't, so you can adjust your offerings, and then you're also tracking whether they passed the licensing exam. And then over time, we started talking again to the providers who were hiring these nurses and say, what are the job skills that they're missing? Well, the first one was something called civility, right? How do I work in an environment that can be somewhat contentious, especially with how do I deal with a doctor who can be verbally abusive? And you guys have heard those stories as well.
That never happens.
That never happens. So, we try to provide people with job-ready skills and think beyond just the academic preparation to pass the license. But when you have that much data, right, over time by having these positions, it's an incredible advantage for us because we can tune the products in the way that's necessary. So, for example, this month, right, April 3rd, first changes in the nursing licensing exam in 5 years. They generally change every 5 years, but this is significant because the new exam has questions regarding clinical judgment as opposed to, multiple choice. So you've got to go through a whole series of questions applying clinical judgment. And so we had to revamp much of our curriculum and assessment to be the leader there. And because, again, having the most relationships, the most data, I think we were able to provide probably the best solution. We'll see when the NCLEX organization publishes its data later in the year, but we hope that we can maintain that 8 to 10 point advantage over all of our competitors on pass rate. But pass rate's only one thing. We're also trying to work on persistence to keep the tuition dollars flowing. So, I knew that was our approach, but as I've learned more about Chat and GPT, all I can tell you is I have some fear about it, but I also feel pretty strong that since we don't have to expose ourselves to the large language model that everyone's talking about, which potentially could be error-ridden and so forth as it gets refined, we've got enough data to feed our private version of ChatGPT, which we set up in Azure, and we'll be feeding it our data, which is pretty robust, and tuning it with our information, not having to really put other data into the platform. That's pretty powerful from a scale perspective.
Maybe we made it 25 minutes in this panel without talking about ChatGPT. I think 30 in the last. So maybe we'll just go. Like, how are you thinking about the implications as you think about your own business. Greg, you touched on a little bit, and the way I'm framing the question with all panelists, are you optimistic, fearful, both? How are you thinking about it?
I'll just say I'm very, very optimistic for two. One is for internal productivity, right, with all the people that are doing work that doesn't really need to be done by people, right, customer care and so forth. So that's one side of it. The other side is, can I get to a better personalization? I think yesterday Scott Pulsifer from Western Governors talked about this, and it's the same ambition. How do we get to true personalization? Because ChatGPT still probably can't understand context necessarily in conversation. It'll get there, but we need to get to that level of personalization. And what struck me yesterday, I don't know if you saw Scott on the stage, but he said, with identical twins, right? You think they'd have the same learning pathway and the same learning styles? Well, they don't. I've got identical twins, and I can tell you, I have to converse with them very differently. So I know their learning styles are different. So how to create an intelligent system to do that, to me, is a dream. And again, we only compete in really mostly in these healthcare areas. But I have hopefully a dream that we can get to a 3-year college degree and maybe a 3-year high school process and cut 2 years off the academic cycle altogether. But let's just start with higher quality and job-ready candidates before we address that one.
So I think that, I'm both very optimistic and I have some cautions. So I'm very optimistic because I think that we can do a lot to take personalization, which we do very well, but we can actually take it to a whole new level. We can also we can bring formative assessment into the learning arena in a very powerful way to give real-time specific feedback while the student is learning about what they're actually learning. That's very, very relevant, not only to the subject matter, but to their own specific learning path. We can also deliver efficiencies like you're talking about. So why does a teacher have to spend time with attendance or some banal things when she can actually increase the amount of time that she spends to create lifelong learners joyfully with delight and surprise? I'm really excited about all those things. The caution comes around what is the implication for equity. So there was a time when a laptop, we defined success in ed tech as getting a device in the hands of everybody. And we said equity was making sure everybody had a device. We didn't actually think about what was being done with that device to actually promote learning that was measurable, predictable, consistent. Put like 1,000x on that with AI. So if AI is going to usher in a whole new generation of people who interact differently with technology because of what you've all seen at this conference and what you've all experienced personally with ChatGPT and other solutions, what happens to the communities of students who for generations have been not well served? Is it enough for 20% of the population to have access to something that's going to catapult innovation? And what is the impact on society, on the Great Society? What's the impact on liberal democracy? What's the impact on senses of fairness? Comity, just social comity. What are the implications? And who's thinking about that? Who's thinking about that? On another panel, I said, I really feel like we need to get together the people at this, 7,000 people at this conference, and we need to embrace a Hippocratic oath for education technology.
A lot of good questions for Bill Gates.
We can't wait for that.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm not going to say anything different. I think there's productivity and innovation, and if we weren't a little bit nervous about it, we'd be fooling ourselves. It's already here. It's living, breathing. AI has been here. We use it for productivity and code review and defects and the things that you do in a product organization. But we're also excited about personalized learning. How do you enable more equity? How do you help students with disabilities using new technologies and AI and ChatGPT and everything else? So I think that's powerful. The most important thing right now is that we slow down to speed up, that we really think about the rules of the road, right? What is the oath that we're making on all technologies? Because this won't be the last one in our lifetime, I don't think. So how do we sort of convene something around higher education, how are we going to adopt this? What are the rules of the road? Most institutions haven't done that yet. They're talking about it, but I think if we balkanize and do one by one on any policy issues, there have to be rules of the road on this. And I do think there's a lot of leadership through the associations, whether it's ACE, AACC, all of them, that are convening bodies that can help think through the rules of the road before what will happen if something bad will happen in some of this is that you'll have Congress act different states. And if we balkanize anything that impacts innovation and technology, it's a slippery slope. So I think it's the most important thing is that we slow down to speed up. It's already here. It's multiple thousand times smarter than any of us. We have to use it in the right ways to amplify what we do. But make no doubt about it, roles and jobs are going to go away, be amplified, and change. So getting ready for that for your workforce is probably one of the most critical things that we do over the next couple of years.
Got it. Yeah, it's really interesting. I wanted to ask another question. As we think about the benefits of scale in this industry, maybe taking it back to your company specifically, how do you think about, product module expansion, what you're going to get into, what you won't? What guardrails do you guys kind of put in place to think about what you're going to do internally, what you're going to pull in, what you're going to allow your channel partners to do? How do you think about product and module expansion?
So I think a lot about this, and I actually think it's going to get more difficult. The tension that I'm about to tell you is going to get more difficult because of AI. There's a tension between what you could build and what you should build. So there's going to be a lot of capital that's going to go into feeding a lot of what we're seeing. We're all excited about AI. There's going to be a huge amount of capital that's going to go into that. Some of those innovations will impact learning in a positive way. But in the beginning, it's going to be elusive, the impact. What is the opportunity cost of chasing what you could do that might not impact learning versus what you should do with a little more go slow to go fast? And so I think what we have to do is really get proximate to our customers because they're nervous about job elimination. They're nervous about having to learn a whole new kind of technology. They're nervous about their role in that new AI space. And so we better get really proximate to our customers to make sure we understand what their fears are as well as what their desires are, and make sure we build to ease the fears and to leverage solutions that deliver on the desires.
And I would only say you have to really always look at the value of what you're building and put your customers in the center. What do they need? And a few of my product leaders are here, so they can do just about anything. They can create and innovate, but you got to focus on your strategy, your North Star, really check in, make sure this is adding value to the customer. We can build anything, we can buy things, but you could find yourself spread way too thin. And I think the goal is, like always say, am I providing value? Is this the most important investment I make? Should I move some of these resources over to, training my future workforce versus putting it more in product? Maximize everything you do with the investments you've made. And when you see the market changing and there's a new capability that you are hearing from your customers that you need, that's when aligned with your strategy, that's when hey, that's a good investment that I'm going to make. I mean, we're owned by private equity, Blackstone and Vista. Every investment we make, that we have metrics around value creation that are tied to our customer success.
Yeah, I'll start with just guardrails. The two easier ones for us is no exposure directly to Title IV funding or Department of Ed regulation, right?
It seems to be changing.
It seems to be changing with the Dear Colleague letter, although that's probably getting retracted. So we stay away from those things. We're really providing the tools to the schools that we can integrate with, as I talked about earlier. So with scale, we're guided to those new solutions by, again, the top thinkers and leaders, in the industry who are doing this work. So in some cases, that might involve, as I said, moving more towards job readiness and beyond just passing a licensing exam. And so when we put in new modules for job readiness training, we know that's going to be attractive for the school because then they're able to have a higher stick rate with when they're placing students in their local community and getting people into the right job. So somebody may be better off in a nursing home, at least initially, rather than a trauma center, for example, but at least we can provide that information. And the schools and the students ultimately will pay for that. Another example is we started to think more about offsetting other costs in the institution. So in the last few years, we've decided to build something called Engaged Fundamentals, but basically what is that? We've taken probably 4 or 5 of the textbooks that people typically would use for nursing, and even if they were digital or ebooks, that wasn't good enough, so we broke those down by building our own proprietary content with SMEs in order to now have a better way to digest that material and only have students who need that through our assessments and the remediation really have to review the material that they should review rather than being into a textbook. So what does that do? Our solution prices up a little bit, but it's far less than what a student would pay for that textbook directly, and it simplifies everyone's life. So those are just a few examples of how we think about it, either career success and or cost optimization for the school. Clinical sites is another one, right? To the extent you can do it through simulation, much cheaper than paying to have someone have to spend time at a live site, and in many cases it's better results. And back to your point about fairness, right? Even with the simulation we have with the avatars that are used, you can give people any particular case. The avatars can be skinned however you want them, or androgynously or whatever, and it allows people to be challenged in a safe environment, right, and get feedback on their behavior in case they showed bias. It's hard to do, right, in a live setting, because you may not be in that environment where you're going to be challenged. So, so I think we just continue to listen to our customers and build those additional modules.
Well, I think we are out of time. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much to the panelists. That was great. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.